Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You know that because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. It is a fabulous Friday, a fantastic Friday, a great Friday if you're a Philadelphia sports fan, and a great day if you're a Philly sports fan on multiple levels, because it's not just that the Phillies just wrapped up a sweep of the Dodgers, which we'll get into a little bit later. It's not because the Sixers have maybe put together the most well-rounded team they've had in a decade, perhaps more. No, it's just the knowledge that training camp's not far away. The Flyers are the Flyers. But yeah, let's just get back to the Phillies. Let's get back to the Phillies and back to the Sixers. That really is the bright spot this weekend. But you can let me know in the comments if you're watching live on YouTube, Facebook, X, wherever you get this show. And if you listen after the fact on the podcast feed, I love and appreciate you. We set the all-time. I mean, it's this is the fourth episode. But episode 3, the most listened to episode in the podcast feed by a significant margin. So I want to thank all of you, because I know if you go and you pop this in your ears instead of watching it on YouTube, it's a different experience. Admittedly, I cater maybe a little bit. I cater to the people who watch just a little bit more, but I appreciate all of you tremendously, seriously. And if you didn't know this, I typically, as soon as the show is done, I immediately go into editing mode. And this show is typically up within an hour or so of the show ending. So if you haven't already done so, you can go subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. But we're going to go to the comments today because there are a lot of things going on. But like I mentioned right from Jump Street, it is a great day. We're going to get to the Phillies sweeping the Dodgers in a little bit, because there are so many good things to come out of that series. And I think it kind of takes the sour taste out of your mouth, if you had one, about losing 2 out of 3 in Atlanta to the Braves. So we're going to get back to that in a second. But no, I'm actually going to start with what I don't want to call a mea culpa, but I am going to point out the fact that there's a possibility that I have to apologize to Daryl Morey. I'm not going to do it yet, but I am man enough, and I think many of you who have known me for a long time, you know that when I feel like I may have been wrong about something, I will admit that I maybe think that I'll accept the fact that I may have been wrong. I'm not totally there yet, but I am getting a little bit closer to saying that while I think Daryl Morey has, in large part during his tenure, been a bit of a flop with the Philadelphia 76ers, he's made some very good signings this offseason. And one of them was a local guy who had played elsewhere, came here last year, kind of dumpster diving after the deadline, and a guy who I did not expect to re-sign, and presumably re-signed for the minimum, although I don't believe the details have come out yet. And that's one Kyle Lowry. So we're gonna get into this because, like I said, when I went into this offseason looking and assessing what the Philadelphia 76ers were, what they needed, and what I thought they needed to address, there were countless options, right? And I don't want to relitigate this. I don't want this to be a thing where, like, every time we talk about a team, I go back and I mention the same few players or I mention the same few options. But going into the offseason, you knew you needed another star. Paul George ended up being that star. Now, I was going to talk about this on Tuesday, but Tuesday was a very rare opportunity and a very rare thing, and something I never actually anticipated doing. It turned into an entire episode about the Philadelphia Union and the Sons of Ben. Got a lot of people reaching out about that episode, by the way. Had former Sons of Ben, like some of the original founding members have reached out. I owe a few of them a DM back. Some members of the Philadelphia Union press corps also reached out with their thoughts, not only about the thoughts on the team, the Sons of Ben, but also, well, the writer that I kind of flamed for the fluff piece with Jay Sugarman, and that's always fun. One of the very little-known things about the media world, about Philly sports media, is there's almost this, it's weird. You can go down and you can cover games with a bunch of people, and when somebody puts something out, the other people talk about it. If you put out a piece that's kind of questionable, chances are your peers are going to talk about it. And chances are your peers, if it's a really poorly done piece or it's misguided, are going to say, man, I just wish somebody would say something. It happens. It happens in Philly media. It happens in the written word with the legacy outlets. It certainly happens with blogs. It certainly happens with radio hosts. It happens with people in TV. It's actually kind of funny. Not that it's malicious, but it is funny. Like, if I flame somebody, and this was always the case back in the day, especially when we were really critical of the media on Crossing Broadcast like 7 years ago, but you would get people who reach out. and who say, hey, like, it's about time somebody said that this guy's full of shit. It still happens, although, as I explained on the very first episode of the show, one of the things that I wanted to get back to is that, because I believe in holding media accountable. And I do feel like at times, this is just the change of what has happened with Crossing Broad over the years, there is more of a friendly relationship with the media, and we might not be as critical. And I say we, but I really don't write for the site anymore. There's a feeling that maybe it's a little bit too chummy. Well, I'm here to bring the edge back. So I will tell you that there were people on the Union beat who reached out, who were very appreciative of my take on the team, on the Sons of Ben, and most importantly, on that Inquirer article. I want to get over to the comments, questions, and concerns really quickly before we get into it. Hunter Mikos checks in and says, good morning. Good morning, Hunter. I hope it's not just a good morning. I hope it's a great morning. I hope it's a great day. Fantastic day. Linda Joseph says, morning, everyone. Hunter says, even though I'm all about the Flyers, I love the background, Russ. And actually, that brings me to this, Hunter. I had friends give me this. I think this was like a few Christmases ago, and I've been looking for a place for it, but I have this this little doohickey here about Gritty, where he looks absolutely demented, and I'm gonna probably add it to the backdrop here. I thought about framing these posters and everything behind me in like the news clippings, but like that takes time. I'm still very much on the fence about whether or not to do it. Jose Nunez checks in and says, cheers, Russ. Have a great show. Appreciate that, Jose. Tremendously. Truly do. Ford wants me to say hi. Hello, Ford. Thanks for checking in. Andrew Fawcett, by the way. Good morning. Happy Friday. Happy Friday to you as well. All right, let's get into the Sixers. So I know I sometimes do this whole thing where I kind of lead up to something and then I get sidetracked. This is the life. This is what I do. Sixers. Going into the offseason, you needed a star. Paul George ends up being the guy. Stylistically, perfect fit. It's a reason why a lot of the national pundits, after he decided to sign with the Sixers, went out of their way to kind of praise it and to say, you know what? This Sixers team with Paul George might have the best big three in the entire NBA because you're not trying to force it. Positionally, you're not trying to force the issue. You don't have, and I know I keep coming back to this, I do not believe that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are a good fit together. They are a good duo, truly a good duo. They just won an NBA championship. But you almost never see a game where both guys are able to take over at the same time. It's almost like one has to defer to the other throughout the game. You take this quarter, I take that quarter. Neither of them really like the fourth quarter, especially Tatum. Brown stepped up more in the postseason, being the guy you can go to later in games. And there have been big threes that haven't worked because the mix just wasn't there. I'd argue that the reason Phoenix doesn't work and didn't work this year is because I don't think that Devin Booker and Bradley Beal are a particularly mesh-like backcourt. I think their games are a little bit too similar. Also, Bradley Beal can't stay healthy. Then you have Kevin Durant, who also doesn't acknowledge that he owns a stake in the Philadelphia Union, but that's another thing for another day. Sometimes big threes look better on paper than they do in practicality, and they do when they're actually on the court. Paul George is this elite wing, as a two-way wing, as somebody who can, in theory, provide you 1 through 4 defense, right? Can actually match up pretty well guarding the 1 through 4. That's valuable. Tyrese Maxey taking that big step last year, massive. Joel Embiid being an MVP when healthy, massive. But the real thing that I needed to see, the thing that I was so critical about Daryl Morey about, and the thing that I've largely been critical of him for since coming to Philadelphia, is the inability to build the team around the star in Embiid, and questioning whether or not he'd be able to build a team around 2 stars in Embiid and Maxey. And when we go back to last year, which it's funny, there's like this revisionist history thing that happens because so many people now, and I've seen this on the radio, of questioning, like, is Daryl Morey the best GM in the history of the Sixers? Did Daryl Morey not get his flowers? Is Daryl Morey owed apologies? I'd say that, like, if you went into this entire offseason saying, like, there's no chance of him doing anything of value, then yeah, like, you kind of sort of do. And that's sort of what I'm getting around to doing here. Like, I think it was a fair critique to say based on the teams he's built over the last few years, that no, there wasn't a lot of confidence that he was going to be able to build a fully formed roster, that he was going to be able to build a team that is cohesive and has depth. It's one thing when you go into a season thinking, all right, we're going to build around Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, and Joel Embiid. And then last offseason, James Harden throws the ultimate wrench with the thing in, it was in Hong Kong or was it in China? I don't remember. Where he said, Daryl Morey is a liar and I'll never play for a team that he's in charge of. That threw everything sideways. Like that threw the entire landscape of what the Sixers season could be, and honestly, the landscape of what the Eastern Conference would be, into a blender. Now, the Sixers had their moments, and the Sixers certainly had a chance to beat the Knicks last postseason. I don't think they ultimately could have beaten the Celtics. And the big reason that I couldn't have seen them beating the Celtics, and ultimately why I don't think they beat the Knicks, not just the health of Joel Embiid, it was the lack of depth. So now you fast forward a little bit and you take a look at what Daryl Morey has done this offseason. Well, B-Ball Paul is gone. Joel Embiid is here. Tyrese Maxey was here. Daryl Morey went into the offseason pretty much with the ability to use as much cap space as he could possibly want. He was lucky enough that Tyrese Maxey waited a year before signing a max extension, presumably with the promise that he was going to be able to go out and get a guy like Paul George. But it's the other pieces around that are really what intrigue me and give me some kind of confidence that I don't think I've had before in Daryl Morey as the head of basketball operations here with the Philadelphia 76ers. Kelly Oubre brought back at a reasonable rate. Kelly Oubre also said to the media that his goal is to eventually sign a long-term contract with the Sixers, that he doesn't want to go anywhere. He likes it here. He likes playing in Philadelphia. All right, Kelly Oubre had a breakout season, one could argue, a season ago. All right, there's one guy. You were able to bring back Andre Drummond. And Andre Drummond's quotes, I'm going to see if I can find it here fast enough and not waste anybody's time. Andre Drummond's quotes about why he decided to come back to Philadelphia were pretty awesome. And it all came back to Joel Embiid. In all honesty, it came back to Joel Embiid being willing and able to actively sort of recruit him. And the fact that they remained in touch the entire time. I'm looking to see, I had the quote pulled up here. If I can find it, we'll get back to it. But Andre Drummond went out of his way to say that he and Joel Embiid never lost contact, that they always stayed in touch, and that ultimately Embiid being willing to remain in touch and to really put some serious belief into the ability of them to work together and to be teammates again is what was going to make him want to come back. And I actually found it. So here we go. We're gonna throw over to Andre Drummond, the best backup big that the Sixers have ever had behind Joel Embiid. We're going to go to that now. Here we go. Here is Andre Drummond on why he decided to re-up with the Sixers.
We stayed in constant communication, so I would talk to him periodically throughout the year. Like anytime he had good games, or he was on my mind, I would check on him. But we always stayed in constant communication, so that relationship never died. And just the moment that he found out there was a possibility that I was going to come here, he called me immediately. So I respected that, and I loved that the most. That he FaceTimed me, bro, like, we doing this? What we doing? Like, what's happening? So just his excitement overall was truly the pushing factor of me coming here.
There you go. The pushing factor of Andre Drummond deciding to re-sign here was Joel Embiid's recruitment. That, I think, is going to become something that you're going to hear more and more of. And Jay Grebby has a fantastic point, and one that you almost forget about because he had a previous stint here and because of how glowingly he spoke about Embiid when he spoke with the media. It's funny to think that Drummond and Joel used to have a legit rivalry when Joel was younger. If you remember, when Drummond played for the Pistons, that was the thing. There was Joel would go and would troll Andre Drummond on Instagram, essentially like, he can't guard me. And it was a thing for a while. And then when the Sixers went out and acquired Drummond, they seemed to strike up something of a friendship. The fans really liked Andre Drummond. I liked Andre Drummond. I like what he brought to the table for the team. And again, having somebody who can come in as a backup big, clean the glass, get you second, third opportunities on the offensive end, end a possession early for the opposition by just being a beast on the boards. That's something this team didn't have last year. They didn't have a backup big who could go in and do that. So Andre Drummond's back. That's big. Eric Gordon, perfectly fine player, all things considered, isn't going to blow the doors off of anyone, isn't going to fundamentally alter much of anything to do with the season, if we're being honest. But a fine piece, another guy who can handle the ball, another guy who can shoot from beyond the arc, a guy who just a season ago with the woeful Spurs hit about 38% of his shots from beyond the arc. That's still a valuable player. And he wasn't just like a 10-minute per game kind of guy. He was playing about 28 minutes per game. So that's another valuable piece you get to add to the puzzle. When they added Gordon and they added Drummond, there were two more positions that I was concerned with them adding. One was another form of a big. I think this one might have actually gone out of order, but I wanted to see if they could get a 4. They needed a power forward. They needed somebody who either slips into the starting lineup as the 4, or in theory could have been another option as a backup big. And they also needed another guy who could handle the ball, potentially hit some shots for you. So we're going to go to that last one first, because it's the thing that came out yesterday. It was the one that was, like I said, I think it was a little bit surprising. I don't know how many suitors he had, but the Sixers deciding, and this player deciding to come back, I think was really big, and that's the return of Kyle Lowry. Now, again, if you have followed me for long enough, you'll know that I think Kyle Lowry is a fine enough player, is a solid player, is not the same guy who played in Toronto, is certainly not the guy that Miami thought they were getting when they handed him a sizable contract a few years ago. But when this news broke yesterday, Shams and Woj put it out, I believe, around the same time, that Lowry was coming back. The presumption is that he's getting the minimum to come back and play for his hometown team. He seemed to have a positive experience here playing for this team, enjoyed playing in front of the home fans. And when you think about, all right, the Sixers have some insurance at center for Joel Embiid with Andre Drummond. Now you have a little bit of insurance for Tyrese Maxey. And in fact, if you're one of the people out there who want to argue that Tyrese Maxey is more of a combo guard, is more of an AI than a Chris Paul, then that kind of helps. Lowry can run an offense. Lowry played well off of Maxey last year. But being able to go into the season and say, depending on matchups, you have the ability to kind of shift your starting lineup and your backups is huge. Who's going to start? Like, is it going to be Maxey with Eric Gordon? Is it going to be Maxey with Lowry? That could depend on the matchup. But either way, you're going to have one of those guys coming off the bench, which automatically makes them, and actually probably not, because you're going to have Oubre's in there. Oubre could maybe play the 2, could play the 3. Like, that's another thing you have to think about. You could potentially have a backcourt. Like, if you started Maxey and Lowry together, and then you brought in an Eric Gordon and a Kelly Oubre off the bench, that's one hell of a backup backcourt rotation. But there was another player that the Sixers went out and somehow got, and I think this is the one that was the most surprising of all. It was the one that I certainly didn't see coming. I don't think most people saw coming. And in fairness, I don't think the Heat expected this guy to leave. And that, of course, is Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin apparently spurned the Heat. Apparently the Heat, a week prior, had offered a 4-year, $52 million contract. And he turned it down. Now, there are conflicting reports. Some reports say that Caleb Martin turned down that offer because he thought there was going to be a more rabid, sort of passionate, heated pursuit of him by multiple suitors. And that didn't come to fruition. But his ability to come in and play the 4, his ability to potentially come in and play as a backup big, depending on the rotation, depending on the situation in the game, is enormous. And he also spoke to the media this week. And like I said, we didn't get to cover this on Tuesday, so some of these clips you may have already heard. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to throw this over to Caleb Martin really quick because there are some positives. And when you think about a new player coming to town, you think about how's the guy going to fit in? Has he started to think about how he's going to fit into the coach's system? And Nick Nurse, I think the one thing that we can all feel pretty good about is that Nick Nurse is a much better, much better coach in this NBA than Doc Rivers was. Let's go to the quotes from Caleb Martin about how he thinks he's going to fit in with Nick Nurse's system.
I definitely think I fit just, knowing the history of Nick and playing with guys and coaching guys like, Kawhi and Kyle. Kyle Lowry is one of my, he's like one of my big brothers right now. So anywhere he fits, I know I'll fit. I mean, we're the same type of guy in terms of just what things that we just try to bring winning attributes to a team. And, he loves it here and he loves playing for me. And so I think I'll fit in for sure.
So that one's notable, and that's notable for a couple of reasons. One, he mentioned that Kyle Lowry's like a big brother to him, which is good. And if you think to yourself, like, hey, well, I thought Caleb Martin signed before Kyle Lowry. He did. Those quotes are from 3 days ago. Now, was he kind of tipping his cap, or was he maybe kind of alluding to the fact that Lowry was going to resign? I don't know. Potentially. Maybe. Possibly. But Martin says that he and Lowry are of a similar mindset. Lowry loves playing for Nick Nurse. He thinks that mentally and what they bring to the table in terms of winning is similar. They were teammates together in Miami, Martin and Lowry were. You've now heard one free agent say, Joel Embiid recruited me here, Andre Drummond. You have another, Caleb Martin, saying that essentially Kyle Lowry recruited him to play here. Whether or not you believe in the concept of heat culture is up to you. But I do think that there's a certain mentality that you typically have to have if you're a Heat player. Now you have two guys who went off, lived that life, and are here. Now, obviously, there are very different points of their career. But you have Caleb Martin, who is going to be an absolute savage and is going to be somebody who's going to stand up for a Tyrese Maxey, is going to stand up for a Joel Embiid, is going to stand up for a Paul George. When you look at what this lineup could be, and you let me know in the comments what you think the starting lineup should be. If you're going to go Maxey, Oubre, Paul George, Caleb Martin, Joel Embiid, you tell me what lineup in recent memory has been better. Now, the first one that comes to mind is from a few years ago. Yes, you could make the case that Ben Simmons, JJ Redick, Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid was a very good starting lineup. I think it was the best in net rating that season. It was a great lineup. This one might be better. This one might stack up better. We can go back and forth. Like, I would actually like to run the simulation on those two teams going head to head. I think this team has better depth. And that's where I come back to Daryl Morey. Do I owe Daryl Morey an apology? I don't think so, because we're not totally there yet. The offseason is big in and of itself. And he has now put together a team that has provided significant insurance behind Joel Embiid, that you can either load manage him, or if you lose Joel Embiid for a stretch of games, which does, in fact, tend to happen consistently. We know this over the course of his career. They have gone out and gotten backcourt depth that could potentially spell Tyrese Maxey, where he doesn't feel like he has to play 82 games. You might be able to even load manage him a little bit. That's huge. Your two best players have insurance behind them. Now, Paul George, if you're going to believe, hey, he's going to play 70 games, you still have the ability up and down that lineup and with the backups to make do. This team on paper that I said a week and a half ago was maybe the second best team in the Eastern Conference on paper, I think has now solidified itself as the second best team on paper in the NBA. It all comes back to health. It all comes back to whatever Joel Embiid looks like going into the playoffs. I still don't think, I will probably say this 1,000 times between now and the end of the regular season. I don't ultimately think that the Sixers are going to finish second. I think they'll finish fourth because injuries are going to get in the way. And there are going to be teams that are gunning for home court because it matters to them more. But I do think this is the second best team in the Eastern Conference. They're probably a top 5, top 6 team if you mix in some of the West. It's a very good team. Do I think that this team, when healthy, can beat that Knicks team, the Nova Knicks? I do. I don't even think it would be close at this point. I don't. I truly think that if you line those two teams up fully healthy in a 7-game series, the Sixers win in 5 or 6. I think the Nova Knicks are very good. How does this team line up against Milwaukee? I think this team dog walks Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee has given up so much. And obviously, Joel Embiid said this during the NBA Finals, but did Milwaukee gift Boston the championship when they sent Drew Holiday their way? I don't think Milwaukee's done a good job of replacing what Drew Holiday brings to the lineup. There is little to nothing that truly scares me about Milwaukee. Giannis Antetokounmpo is one player. Damian Lillard's best days are far behind him. I don't even think the Bucks are a number 2 threat anymore. Now, again, they might be a team that's able to stay healthy, and maybe they do gun for home court advantage, and it matters to them, and they are one of the teams that leapfrog the Sixers, but they don't scare me in the way that they might have a year or two ago. I think seeing what we saw from Dame a year ago takes just a little bit of the sting out of them. It takes just a little bit of the fear that you might have had out of the equation. So you can pick however you want this to go. And you let me know in the comments because I'm interested to see where everybody's at. But some combination of Celtics, Sixers, Knicks, and Bucks are probably your top 4. I don't think it's particularly close. I don't see another team in the Eastern Conference that I think is a legitimate threat to even be a top 4 team, or certainly to contend for making it to the Eastern Conference Final and representing the East in the NBA Finals. I don't see it. Some people might say that an upstart Orlando team is one to keep an eye on. Some might say that Cleveland is still worth keeping an eye on. I just don't see it. So if we take all of this into account, is Daryl Morey owed an apology? No, but he is deserving of kudos and recognition for putting together what on paper is probably the best Sixers team that we have seen in a decade, maybe longer. Again, on paper, a very, very good Philadelphia 76ers team. I'm going to get over to some of the questions, comments, and concerns. Because we have this, we have the Phillies. Might sneak a little bit of additional talk in at the end of the show. If you have something else you want to hear about, if there's something you want to engage about with one of the other teams, by all means, drop it in the comments. It is a fun Friday. Happy to get to it. It could be about sports. It could be about Philly. It could be about something else. Just let me know. Drop it in the comments, and we'll see where the day takes us. Andrew Fawcett says that he wishes he cared more about basketball. Andrew's a big Snow the Goalie listener. Andrew, this might be the year. This might be the year to actually care a little bit about the Philadelphia 76ers. What I do want to know from people is how you feel about Joel Embiid participating in the Olympics. Because I view Joel Embiid playing in the Olympics as a mostly good thing, although I do have significant concerns and fears about his ability to stay healthy and the fact that he's adding extra miles to those knees that are already a problem and to that back that's already a problem and those feet which have historically been a problem. But if you want to go back to that idea of recruiting, he can't go out and recruit any more stars, but he can, in theory, build up his profile. I think the thing that the Olympics will help Joel with is if he's able to help lead the U.S. team to a gold medal, and the Sixers have a nice start to the season, what Daryl Morey has done is put the Sixers into position, and Embiid can now help with this. When you get to the trade deadline and guys start getting bought out, and you start to get those ring-chasing vets who can hit 38, 39% from beyond the arc, if Morey isn't able to go out and get another one of those guys before the season starts, in theory, they might be able to pick one of those guys up at the end of the year. And there are a few things that those kind of ring-chasing guys look for. They look for a team, obviously, that is a significant threat to win the NBA title. They look for a team that plays in a good market that's going to be enjoyable to play at. I mean, you still have to live there. So for some of these guys, they don't want to be too far from home. You spend a lot of days on the road anyway. And they want to play with the best players that they can. It's one thing to be a buyout guy and say, all right, I'm happy to help try to take in Orlando into the top 4. But if you have that choice, or you could sign with one of the, what I would consider rock solid top 4 in the conference, you're going to consider it. I think they're going to put themselves in position to go after those guys around the trade deadline. So that's important. Jay asks, do I think Rocco comes back? Could be a really nice 3-and-D deep depth piece. I have no idea. I don't know what he wants. Contractually, I don't know what he wants. I think the Sixers are mostly in a position where they have to offer veteran minimums. I don't know if he's going to want to come back for that. There's probably a team that's happy to pay him more. I think people look a little bit too much into what Rocco was in his first tenure here, and that he was a hinky guy. And I was a hinky guy, big hinky believer. But I don't think Rocco's a guy that you really worry about either way. I don't think he's a guy who's going to be able to be relied upon to hit a critical 3 late in a game. As a depth piece, he's fine. If he wants to come in for the minimum, fine. He might be a worthy piece to trade around the deadline if you're trying to free up some cap space so that you can go out and pick up one of those guys that might actually be a better fit later on. You do have to fill out the roster. On a minimum deal? Maybe. Perhaps. Let's go back to, I saw a thing about culture. Lenda Joseph says, so it sounds like culture is important when you have a team that's contending or wants to win now, not rebuilding. Take note, Flyers. Sorry for inserting the Flyers here, but I couldn't resist. It's a fair point. It's a point that I made on last weekend's Snow the Goalie. I think it's one of the points that incensed one of my co-hosts on that show. Is culture is great. Culture is great, especially when you have most of the pieces in place and you're trying to take a team that's on the precipice of taking that next step and you ramp it up. Culture, when you have a team that is incredibly young or is an underachieving team and doesn't have the pieces to take that next step, is an exercise in futility to some extent. Obviously, it's different. Basketball, the number of players, the impact one guy can have versus hockey, entirely different. I do think, yes, culture matters, and culture will certainly matter with the, I don't want to say egos, but like the guys that are going to be coming in to play on this team. They all believe that they can contribute to this team and help get this team into the NBA Finals and potentially hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy. When you look at where the Flyers are at, the culture is great, except you have a bunch of young guys, many of whom aren't going to be on this team, and a lot of the vets that they have that they rushed off to re-sign, like an Eric Johnson or a Garnet Hathaway. Good player in the case of Hathaway, player coach in the Eric Johnson. The culture matters, but it doesn't matter as much because you're trying to instill a culture with a team that like 60% of it, 70% of it won't even be here when it's time to flip the switch and become a Stanley Cup contending team. That's why I think culture is a little bit overblown in hockey. Just a little bit. You don't have a lot of the prima donna issues. You don't have a lot of the issues that people say tear apart locker rooms in the NFL and the NBA, and even to some extent in baseball. Hockey has its own culture. Hockey has its own ways that it, takes care of its own. There might be better leadership in the locker rooms. There's also that unwillingness to really say anything in the media. It's always we, the team, the team, the team. I think culture matters, but I think it is a little bit overblown. Let's see. Ford says they won't win the Eastern Conference, the Sixers. They'll lose to Boston at some point, and things won't ultimately be that much different. They won't make the NBA Finals. Also thinks that the Bucks are cooked. Lillard is older, plays no defense. That's ultimately fair on the Bucks. Boston is going to be one hell of a matchup. Again, on paper, do the Sixers stack up well against the Celtics? For once, I think they actually do. We'll see how it plays out as the season goes on. I will certainly circle the Sixers-Celtics games on the calendar, though. Those are going to be must-watch TV. That matchup, more than any other this year, is the one that I'm the most focused on because ultimately, that's what should be the Eastern Conference Final. Hunter says, basketball is the only sport I can't watch. I wish I could. I'm just so locked into hockey when the season starts. Open your heart, Hunter. Open your heart and believe. There's always time to watch more than one sport. Plus, you've got the TV, got a tablet, got a phone, got a computer, do a little YouTube TV. Sometimes you could do the multi-screen on YouTube TV, and you watch both. Pretty much the same thing. Follow along on social media. Get your clips there. Totally fine. Just saying. Dan Herman says, my hope for the Sixers is short. If they don't win the big one in the next 2 years, it'll all go for nothing outside of Maxey. Okay. Let's talk about that for a second. If the Sixers don't win a championship in the next 2 years, it's not a failure if they're close. The process will not have been for nothing if they don't win a title with Joel Embiid. However, it's going to be damn near impossible to ever convince this fan base to tear things down the way that Sam Hinkie did. And I think that's fair. Now, one of the things that the people who hated the process, and here I am wearing a Trust the Process shirt, one of the reasons that some people really hated what Sam Hinkie did is because they feel like it was, kind of throwing a middle finger to the basketball gods, that it wasn't the right way to go about rebuilding. In basketball, it's a perfectly acceptable way to rebuild. The difference is your GM has to have a relationship with either the media or somebody in the league office in order to kind of keep the dogs at bay. Hinkie didn't have that. Sam Presti, for the most part, had executed for an even longer period of time a bigger tank than Hinkie ever did, trading off some of his best young players to accrue assets. Really, the only guy that was untouchable for him was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That was it. And now he's got this treasure trove of picks, and now you listen to some of the pundits when, bigger targets come up, when free agents come up, when potential trade options come up, people are like, oh, Sam Presti's done an incredible job building a treasure trove of assets, first-round picks galore, pick swaps galore. Like, he tore it down. He tore it down even farther than Hinkie did. But his team plays in a market that people don't care as much from a national perspective. The people in Oklahoma City do care about their team, but the NBA at large mostly doesn't care about Oklahoma City. It's an actual meaningful, impactful thing if the Sixers suck. Or if the Knicks, which in fairness for most of the decade, suck. Or if the Celtics suck. If the Lakers suck. Those are all bad for the NBA. Oklahoma City being bad, you can kind of brush under the carpet. So that was its own issue. Now, when it comes to the Sixers and to the process, Sam Hinkie did the right thing at the right time with an ownership group that was willing to understand and to accept the fact that in order for you to compete in this NBA, you need to have top picks, elite talent, and build a team around it. Were it not for the fact that Ben Simmons turned into a total head case and had whatever this back issue is, the combination of Ben Simmons, if you go back and watch the Summer League games from his rookie year, that player who was willing to pull up from the foul line in, that player who would even attempt an occasional three-pointer, along with Joel Embiid, could have won a championship if a team had been built around them appropriately. Alas, didn't come to pass. Hinkie was gone. Markelle Fultz. Were it not for thoracic outlet syndrome, or perhaps him taking a spill on a BMX bike that he told the Sixers that he had gotten rid of. If Markelle Fultz had been what he was supposed to be, he was the perfect fit alongside Simmons and Embiid. A guy who could handle the ball, a guy who could pull up from anywhere, a guy who had not limitless range, but pretty damn near close. Could have allowed Simmons to sort of become a de facto 4. That should have worked. In most simulations of what the NBA would have looked like around that time, those three should have worked together. In a way, if you think about it, Tyrese Maxey was almost like the karmic payoff for Markelle Fultz not working. Paul George is going to play a similar role, in fairness, to what Ben Simmons could have eventually kind of turned into. Being a guy who can slash, being a guy who, in theory, was supposed to be able to pull up from at least the mid-range. They're really not comparable. I take it back. Ben Simmons has better court vision, is a better passer. Paul George is a much better shooter, willing to take contact at the rim. They're not the same player. but consider them the third option on either of those teams. It should have worked. It didn't work. Sometimes the guys that you draft high don't pan out. And it sucks. And it's a shame. In theory, it should have worked. Embiid was the guy who fell to you because the Bucks wanted to take Jabari Parker. You got lucky. And Embiid had some injury issues. Do I think that Joel Embiid can be the number one option on a team that wins the NBA title? No. I think we've seen that time and time again. Do I think that Joel Embiid could be a number one-ish option on this team alongside Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, knowing the gravity that they're going to have on their own and knowing some of the guys that they have acquired this offseason are around and can actually be relied upon to hit shots? Yes, I do think that it changes fundamentally what the end-of-game situations look like with Joel Embiid. At least a little bit. At least a little bit. So I don't think it was all for nothing. If they get bounced in the first round this year, then I'm going to probably agree with Dan to some extent. Because then it will feel like they had wasted another year of Joel Embiid's career. The one thing that I can definitely say about this season going in that I couldn't last season is that they have put a legitimate supporting cast around these guys. There are no excuses left. This is a year that you have to get something done. So let me reset now that I've kind of marinated and I've said all this. We're not going to call this a hot take alert because it's not a hot take if it's the right take. If the Philadelphia 76ers don't make it to the Eastern Conference Finals after acquiring Paul George, after acquiring Andre Drummond and Caleb Martin and bringing in Eric Gordon and bringing back Kelly Oubre, if they don't make the Eastern Conference Finals, this is a failure, and it will be time to have a conversation about trading away one of your stars, more likely than not, Joel Embiid, and starting over. There will be a conversation. For the first time, it might actually be warranted because there are no excuses. I would still give it another year. I would say that in the next year or the next 2 years, if you don't make it to an NBA Finals, you have 2 years. Make it to the NBA Finals. The hell with the Eastern Conference Finals. Make it to the NBA Finals. You have 2 years. If you don't, then it's time to blow things up. Then it is time to have a legitimate look at whether or not you can build a team around Joel Embiid. But for now, I think they're good enough. I think they can actually make something happen. Ford says that he doesn't think the Sixers have enough. And you know what, Ford? You can believe that. And this is the beauty of this show. We'll be doing this all year. Will it be Tuesdays and Fridays all year? I don't know. I think when football comes around, we might change the days a little bit. I can't imagine waiting 2 days to talk about an Eagles game that happened on Sunday. We'll see. But we'll be doing this show. You can hold me accountable. People can clip this. You can do all your stuff. Make your notes. Okay. Now, I want to get to the Phillies because if you paid attention last week, I brought up the fact that I don't like living in this hyperbolic world where we say this is a must-win series in July. It's a must-win series in June. It's a must-win series in April. Like, that's all nonsense. What I did say about the Braves series was, don't go down there and get swept. Winning 2 of 3 would be great. Getting a sweep would be phenomenal. Losing 2 of 3 wouldn't be ideal, but it wouldn't be debilitating. It wouldn't be backbreaking. I think a lot of people, when they went into the Braves and Dodgers series, the hope was split it. Go 3-3, knowing that you were going to be without Harper and you were going to be without Schwarber for that Braves series. Knowing all of that, get a split. 3-3 and you're happy. They did better than that. Went 4-2. They won the first game of the Braves series. They lost the last 2 games. Then they swept the Dodgers. Now, the Dodgers aren't at full health, admittedly. But if you take a look at what the Phillies were able to do over the last few days, it's massive. Now, we have to be really clear. The Dodgers, to some extent, when you think of like the best teams in baseball, the Dodgers, when healthy, have one of the best offenses in the game. The Phillies held them to 5 runs the entire series. In the opener, it was a 10-1 blowout, a demolition, an absolute barrage, a masterclass in how to open a can of whoop ass by the Phillies. Second game was a 1-run affair. You walk away with a 4-3 win, everybody feels good. Yesterday was what was ultimately what I think the doctor ordered. Because you not only kept Shohei Ohtani 0 for on the day, but you got a legitimate start out of Aaron Nola. And I will continue to come back to this. And again, if you have been with me for this ride for however many years, you'll know that I think Aaron Nola has ace stuff and not ace stuff up here. There's some kind of disconnect where this guy has Cy Young stuff, but he doesn't always put it together. He's been inconsistent at best for a few years. The team went out and paid him a massive, massive amount of money this offseason, which I would not have done. I know that the Phillies made a huge offer to Yamamoto. I don't know if I would have been comfortable giving the amount of money to Aaron Nola that they did. But again, not my money, not my problem. Nola, with a chance to wrap up a sweep, went out and did exactly what he was supposed to do. 6 innings, 1 earned run, 4 hits allowed. That's it. Strikeout to walk, 9-2. Did exactly what he's supposed to do. Did what some would argue is what an ace would do. Again, I think Zach Wheeler is the ace. I think Zach Wheeler has been the ace of this staff from the moment he signed on the dotted line. But what Aaron Nola did yesterday was tremendous on a few levels. It was tremendous for the Phillies because they got that sweep against the team that they've largely been battling as the best in the National League. They put a significant gap. That is a legitimate swing. I mean, yes, it picks up 3 games, but if that goes the other way, right, that's a 6-game swing. You picked up a 3-game gap between yourselves and the Dodgers for home field advantage. The Phillies are now 61-32. They wrapped up their 9th series sweep of the season. They had 7 last year. They have 9 series sweeps before the All-Star break after having 7 the entire season a year ago. We can sit back, and if we're being honest and we're being objective, we do the macro view. A lot of times in Philly, you take a look at a team, you overrate it, you overrate the players, you overrate the moment, you get lost in it, and then you kind of feel stupid after the fact. This is one of the times where whether you're living in the moment or you go macro view, this is a really freaking good team. Really good. Great. We could probably even say great now. Because there's one thing that good teams do, and there are other things that great teams do. One thing that great teams are able to do that good teams don't is great teams are able to overcome when they lose their stars for extended periods of time. The Phillies lost Schwarber and Harper for a bit. They stayed afloat. They didn't lose significant ground in the NL East. They didn't lose significant ground in the National League. They didn't lose significant ground for being the best team in baseball. They've had multiple times this year where they've lost a guy and you've had like a Clemens come up and step up in a big way. You continue to see throughout the weeks, like a guy that I like, a guy that I want to believe, is going to be something and like could potentially take another step is a Bryson Stott. He's had his moments. He's certainly had his struggles. Alec Boehm, played like an MVP candidate for a couple months this season. Had a couple of stretches where he wasn't. Trey Turner, I don't know what it is. I don't know what's gotten into the man. Since he came back, has been lights out, has been unconscious, has another massive game, another home run. Trey Turner, had he not gotten injured, would probably be the front runner for MVP of the National League. He's been that good this year. And you want to talk about like what last year looked like? You want to talk about whether or not the standing ovation was real? If there was actually anything good to come out of the standing ovation? Did it really affect the player? I think we all know that the concept that like the standing ovation is solely responsible for Trey Turner's turnaround last year is total and utter bullshit. However, if you want to buy into that, if that's the world you want to live in, it's a little bit delusional, but that's okay. He has rounded into form. He looks like every bit of the player they gave a significant deal to last year. His ability to play at an MVP level, Boehm's ability for stretches to play at an MVP level, Harper's ability to play at an MVP level, Real Muto at one point to play at an MVP level. They are getting contributions from everyone, everywhere. When you have a great team that doesn't rely on one guy, like the Yankees are a really good team, right? They're not a great team. Aaron Judge is a significant game-changing player. You look at the Yankees lineup outside of an Aaron Judge. Go ask any Yankees fans in your life how they feel about the Yankees right now. Seriously, go ask them. Soto's a good player. When he's on and Judge are on, the entire lineup looks different. But that's really like a one-batter lineup. They have one guy who really strikes fear in your heart. You look at this Phillies lineup, even when they're not at 100%, it's still a damn scary lineup. Lineup on Thursday. Schwarber, Turner, Harper. Good luck. Bohm, based on how he's played this year. Good luck. Stott, hit or miss. Castellanos, okay. Well, everybody has to have a weak spot somewhere. But he even had an okay game yesterday. Brandon Marsh, really depends on the game. I like Brandon Marsh. He is a platoon player, if we're being fair. But he's a good platoon player. Johan Rojas, not a very good hitter, but Johan Rojas plays some damn good center field. He had a play yesterday where on commentary, McCarthy and Kruk could not believe he was able to get the break on the ball that he did and chase it down in that left center field gap. And by the way, he had quotes after the game. We'll get to those in a second. If Rojas is able to hit even at like a 250 clip, 240, that changes things for this team. That makes this team even more dangerous. Stubbs is a good guy, at least in terms of the clubhouse vibe. I've seen a lot of people shit on Garrett Stubbs, and it's mostly because they think that he's only there because he sets the playlist and he wears the overalls and the guys like him. I got to tell you, whether you believe that or not is up to you. The pitchers still perform well with him behind the plate. And ultimately, it is important that the guys like each other. You send that guy out because you have somebody else that can get a few more hits for you here or there at the bottom of the lineup. Vibes do matter. Clubhouse chemistry matters. Am I willing to give one spot in that lineup or one spot on that roster to a guy who's there for vibes only? I am. And he's that guy. Hunter checks in and says, Rojas is hitting now, which makes the team scary. Team's scary even without him. But yes, certainly makes that roster scary. Spiral Out also just joined the show. Says, what up, Russ? What up, Spiral? How you doing? Hope you have a great Friday. Let's get back into it, though, into this Phillies game from yesterday. Strom comes in. Fantastic. Jeff Hoffman comes in, does his job. Jose Alvarado comes in. There was a little bit of a moment in the ninth, but for the most part, the man is locked in. I know that people, there is still a contingent of Phillies fans who believe that Jose Alvarado can't be your closer if you're trying to win the World Series. I think this man, you allow him to build his confidence. You allow that bullpen to just continue to be a lights-out, dominant force. And you give Alvarado the feeling and the belief that he can work his way out of anything. It will absolutely pay dividends when you get to the postseason. I like Jose Alvarado. I know people jumped on him earlier this season when he had a couple of rough ninth innings. I think he's a very good closer for this team. I don't see any need to add a guy to the back end of the bullpen. If one does become available around the deadline and you want to throw them in to be the setup guy, fine. But I think this is one of those rare times where you look at the potential trade market and like closer isn't the first thing that comes to mind. Even when Kimbrel was here, there was still that thought of like, I don't know, man, Kimbrel's kind of erratic. Like maybe he's not cut out to do this anymore. With Alvarado, I think you do have your closer. And I think that between Hoffman and Strom and some of the other guys in the back end of that bullpen, you for once actually look pretty damn good. Now, I know that the Phillies are potentially looking at other outfielders. You know, is it a matter of them thinking that the platoon situation that they might have to run into the postseason, especially with Marsh, is not worth it? Or they want to have another body, or they want somebody that they think can be an everyday outfielder for them? I don't know what that's going to look like. We'll see here over the next few weeks what they ultimately decide to do. It is one of the very rare times where I look at a Phillies team and I say, there aren't really that many holes. There isn't anything that is a significant, serious, pressing need. Now, I'm not a big believer in Nick Castellanos. I'm not exactly sure that he's going to turn it around. I'm not exactly sure that he's ever going to live up to the contract he gave him. But even with that in mind, they're still able to overcome that. And when he does contribute, it's almost, I don't know, it's almost like found money, you know? It's almost like you're playing with house money at that point. It shouldn't be because of the contract they gave him. Again, it's like, it's one thing if a Stott steps up and becomes the second coming of Chase Utley. It's another thing when you've given Nick Castellanos the kind of money that you have, and you're almost like, you know, celebrating him like he's Rudy when he has a good game. Now, Hunter asks, what are you doing at the starter position in that fifth spot? When he's back, when he's healthy, I want to see them give it back to Spencer Turnbull. That's what I would like to see happen. I don't ever want to see Taijuan Walker pitch for the Phillies again. Ever. Ever. Ever again. And if the Phillies have the feeling that Turnbull can't cut it, can't hack it in the rotation, they're worried about his arm, and they think that they have to return him to the bullpen, or they have to shut him down for the season, I still don't want Taijuan Walker to pitch again for this team. There's nobody in the minors right now that I would say, yes, throw them into that fire. That at that point, then maybe you do go look for another pitcher to add to the rotation. I guess my contention here is I don't like the idea of going out and looking for a number 5 starter. I like the idea of looking for a guy who's like a mid-rotation guy, because eventually you would think that Christopher Sanchez might come back down to earth. You might think that at some point Ranger Suarez might regress a little bit. I think looking for a number 5 guy is really risky if either Suarez or Sanchez or both drop a little bit. Or if you were to lose Wheeler, which unfortunately I think I said last week, you know, like you're a Wheeler injury away from the Braves feeling like there's blood in the water. Wheeler came out with back soreness in his last start. Am I concerned? Like, yeah, I think anybody should be concerned about the health of Zach Wheeler. But if he were to go down or Enola were to go down, that's where I say having a middle of the rotation guy that's able to kind of take some pressure off, maybe even move into a number 2 role if one of your top 2 guys is out for a bit, that is significantly more impactful and more meaningful. I think that this is one of the times where you have to actually look at, maybe you do part with a prospect that you didn't want to, because this is a year to go after it. Based on the season they've had so far, this feels like a push all the chips in, right? This feels like you don't want to trade your top 3 prospects in the system, but this definitely feels like a team that is special. This feels like a team that is ready to take that next step. It feels like a team that's not only ready to get to the World Series, but is actively ready to win it, is built to win it, is built for the postseason. And if this Phillies team that we have seen that has started out 61-32, if this Phillies team makes it into the postseason at full health, they will win the World Series. It's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of the Philly fear, it's not a matter of worrying about all the times that you've been burned as a fan. If this Phillies team makes it into the postseason healthy, they will win the World Series. They might sweep the first 2 rounds of the postseason. That's how good this team is. They have not failed to meet a moment this season. There is no team in the National League that should strike fear in the hearts of the Philadelphia Phillies. I would argue there's not a team in baseball right now that, when healthy, could stack up to this Phillies team in a 7-game series in the World Series. Book it. We're good. I think we're good. All right. We talked about the Phillies. We talked about the Sixers. I'm mostly talked out for today. I have enjoyed doing the show today, and I want to thank Spiral, because Spiral had a very positive thing to say over here, living it up. Great show as always. I appreciate that. To all of you who check in live on YouTube, on X, and Facebook, I appreciate you tremendously. Now, as we're still trying to figure out what this show is, what it's going to be, how long it's going to be, the kind of segments, the interaction with the people in the comments, are we going to start to do the calls? Are we going to start to do the voicemail line? There is a phone number. I might drop it next week. I might bring it up and pop it on the screen. If you have a thought over the weekend, it might be something worth considering. I'm not saying I'm going to do this every show. I'm certainly not saying that it's something I want to rely on. I don't want this to turn into sports talk radio where you hear a host talk for 5 minutes and then it's, a half hour of calls and listening to the same goobers call up time and time again and say the same crap that they've been saying on all the other shows. I don't necessarily want to fall into that. But maybe I'll drop the phone number. If I do, I'll put it out on social media. We can do the thing. You can call in. We can have a chat. We can have a wonderful time. You can leave a message for the line for a reaction. So if there's something that happens over the weekend and you want to get your thoughts on the show, we can work on that. That's what we're looking at for potentially next week. Now, there are a few other things that were happening in and around the Philly sports media landscape. The last thing, we talked about this a little bit on Crossing Broadcast yesterday. There's a guy who's getting ready to hang up the headphones, turn off the mic. That's Glen Macnow. Now, I didn't grow up in this area. I didn't listen to WIP as a kid. I had little to no idea of what WIP was until I got to college. This is what happens when you grow up in the coal region. But I will say that in the time that I have gone from college till now, and in the time that I have had the opportunity to listen to sports talk radio, one of the absolute most enjoyable experiences, one of the most enjoyable shows that I can remember listening to was listening to Glen Macnow and Ray Didinger on the weekend. And I think that Glen Macnow leaving is yet another one of the radio legends from this market that people are going to have to somehow make do without. They're going to have to figure out what they're going to listen to next. I think sports talk radio in this city is in a really weird place. I think that if you had an honest conversation with a lot of the guys who are on air right now, they would say the exact same thing. I am very critical of the fact that WIP doesn't have to change anything they're doing because they continue to win in the ratings books. Whether you agree with their philosophy, their methodology, the way that they go about, whether you think it's hot takes, whether you think it's sensationalism, they don't have to change anything. They're number one. They're number one for a reason, and they can continue to do that. I'm very critical of the other station because, again, they do the same thing. In many cases, they are parroting the same talking points. They're using the same clips. The people who call into the shows call into both stations. It's like a watered-down version, and they haven't changed anything. And they, right now, do not have a single person on the radio airwaves at their station who has built up the emotional equity or has built up the equity with a listenership in the way that Macnow did. And in fact, I don't know if we will ever see a Philly sports talk radio person have, I would say, damn near as high as positive of a view from the fan base, from the listenership, as Macnow has. Mike Missinelli had a massive listener base. If and when he returns to the Fanatic to take over middays, he'll have a massive fan base. He will also have a massive detractor list. Tony Bruno had a massively popular opinion from listeners and people in the area. At some point, Tony Bruno very much leaned into his political leanings and alienated a good number of people who liked his show. Howard Eskin, we're not going to touch that one. Best not to touch. Will say, has a lot of fans, has a lot of detractors. But I don't think there's anybody at the Fanatic or even at WIP right now who across the board has the same kind of positive reaction largely from a listenership that Macnow has. Now, is it because he hosted a show with Ray Didinger and it's virtually impossible to hate Ray Didinger? Maybe. But I'd like to think that it's because the guy is a professional. The guy is a pro's pro. He's somebody who has done his job with class, and he is somebody who will be sorely, sorely missed in Philly sports talk radio. Now, do I think he's going to go off and start a podcast? No. But if he does, I'll wish him the best. We'll go over here really quick because there are some comments over here. Spiral Out says, this is why I'm here. Traditional sports talk radio is a black hole. I think he was trying to say traditional sports talk radio is a black hole, and that says black radio. It's black hole. Okay. Peter Kurz checks in. First time I've seen that name, I believe, on the show. So thanks for checking in, Peter. Says spot on. Appreciate that. Spiral says Glenn's beer TV show is pretty good too. Peter says that he only listens to sports talk radio on the weekends. An increasing number of people that I know say the exact same thing. Linda Joseph mentions the Mac and Mac show back in the day was awesome, miles ahead of what WIP is today. It's kind of sad. Gonna miss Glenn. And Peter says Jody Mack is the only OG I can listen to, and he agrees about it. Eskin is very polarizing. I have no idea what the station is going to do without Macnow in that spot. I think it's very. This is one of those, it's not a shot. That show that he did with Didinger was sensational. The second that Ray decided it was time to leave, I was surprised that Glenn didn't leave with him. And I will say this, I have had this conversation with at least one other person in Philly radio. It is very hard when you have built up a listenership and a level of trust with not only your listenership, but with your co-host, that when one of you chooses to leave or decides that it's time, it is so incredibly hard to find that chemistry and, again, that trust with another person. It is really, really hard. And the idea of doing it, to some extent, almost makes it feel like the show itself will never be the same. It is rare that a show gets better after one of those people leave. I can't really think of any examples, whether it's on the radio, whether it's a podcast. One of the podcasts that I loved, absolutely loved and adored, was Reply All. If you've listened to Reply All or you listened to their previous show, TLDR, it was PJ Vogt and Alex Goldman. They did incredible shows together. Stuff about the internet. If you haven't listened to it before, it's a great show. You really should go download it and listen to it. Tons of episodes. But things fell apart at the end. There was a big scandal. There was a big thing where Reply All tried to do a series about Bon Appetit, mostly about like the YouTube channel, the Bon Appetit YouTube channel. And it caused all this outrage within Gimlet, who owned Reply All, and about the way that they had treated their own employees or people on the Reply All team. It was a whole thing. You can go back and listen to it. It is what it is. But those two ended up going different ways. PJ Vogt left. Shruti Pinnamaneni, who was one of their lead producers, left. And Alex Goldman, who was a very good host and who was part of those excellent episodes, stayed. And Emmanuel Jochi, who had come on as a third host at some point towards the end of that time with PJ and Alex together, he came in. He was very good as well. Once PJ was gone, it felt like a totally different show. It never found its stride. And it almost sounded like it came across in the way that they did episodes from that point on. And ultimately, the show didn't last much longer. I think they did 6 episodes, maybe. I could be wrong. I think it was 6 episodes. And then the show was done. Then it went on a hiatus, and they came back and said, like, it's over. Like, we're done. We're moving on. We're going off to do other things. It is so hard to find the way to kind of capture that magic. So when Didinger left, I thought there was a good chance Macnow would leave with him. Surprised that he didn't. He did the show with Sealski for a bit. That show was not the same show. But if you liked Glenn, that show was still where you would go to listen to Glenn. Now that he leaves, I have no idea what they're going to do in that time slot on the weekend. It will not be the same. I think that they would be smart to almost blow up what that time slot was. You are not going to be able to replicate what Glen Macnow brought to that spot. They will probably keep Sealski there and have somebody else come in, and maybe they'll try to do a sort of level-headed deep dive show like that show was, but it will not feel the same. Although I guess you do run the risk that if you try to pop in somebody who might be a little bit more what some might call hot takey, maybe it won't work. We'll see. Anyway, all the best to Glen Macnow in his retirement, and I will be back on Tuesday. I'm not retiring. I'm not going anywhere. We're back here with the Russ Joy Show on Tuesday. In the meantime, if you just can't get enough, for whatever reason, of listening to me talking to a microphone, by all means, you can find me doing some of the other shows. Snow the Goalie, Crossing broadcast on Monday at noon. Thursdays, Most of the time I hop on that show as well at noon. But this show, this is my baby. This is my passion project. And I want to thank all of you because last episode, like I said, was the biggest listener number in the podcast feed. I believe it was also the biggest watch number on YouTube. I want to keep that going. So do me a favor. If you like this show, if you enjoy this show, if you want to support this show, the best way you can do it is as follows. Go over to Apple Podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating. Most importantly, leave a 5-star review. That's huge. If you have Spotify, go over to this show on Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating. You can't leave reviews there, but you can leave a rating. That helps tremendously. If you watch on YouTube and you haven't done so already, please hit the like button. The like button, the way that YouTube looks, the way that that weird algorithm works, they look for likes, they look for watch time. There are a whole lot of different factors that go into it, but if you can like this video, share the video. That's another big thing. Share the video and subscribe to the channel. That is how you can help this grow even bigger. This is available over on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. If you're watching on the Joy Media account, at Joy Media LLC, by all means, you can keep watching there, and that's totally fine, and I appreciate you just as much. But go over and subscribe to The Russ Joy Show, and again, wherever you get your podcasts. So I want to thank everybody who tuned in. I want to thank Hunter over here for the nice comments. Great show. Snow the Goalie is partly hurting to listen to right now, respectfully. Thank you, Russ. Have a great weekend. I think he's hurting because, we have very different viewpoints on where the Flyers are supposed to go on that show. We're conflicting, and also it's the off season. I haven't really done a lot to inspire confidence, but I want to thank everybody. I want to thank people for the kind words during the show today. I want to thank all of you for supporting. And again, I look forward to talking to all of you again on Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., wherever you get your video podcasts live, YouTube, X, Facebook, then after the fact in the podcast feed. Thank you so very much for supporting the show. I'm Russ Joy. This is the Russ Joy Show. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you on Tuesday.